In a shocking twist that has rocked the very foundations of the House of Windsor, King Charles III has finally dropped the mask of the patient brother and assumed the mantle of the ruthless sovereign. Just moments ago, a directive was signed within the silent, high-ceilinged offices of Buckingham Palace, a directive that effectively ends the era of Prince Andrew's shielded existence. The king has officially ejected Prince Andrew from the royal estate forever. This is not merely a dispute over property or a simple change of address. It is a calculated, surgical removal of a limb that has become gangrenous to the body of the monarchy. For the woman known as the monarchy's backbone, Princess Anne, and the future King, William, this move represents the final closing of a dark chapter that has dragged the crown through the mud for far too long. Imagine the silence that fell over Royal Lodge this morning. This 30-room mansion, a sanctuary of unearned privilege, has been Andrew's fortress for years. He clung to its walls like a shipwrecked sailor clinging to a rotting mast, believing that his mother's past favor and his own royal blood would act as a permanent shield against the winds of change. But Charles has just cut the cord. There were no grand announcements, no sentimental family meetings, and certainly no room for appeal. The memorandum bore the king's signature unwavering and cold. It declared that Andrew is, effective immediately, no longer entitled to the shelter of the royal estate. To you, the viewer who understands that a legacy is earned through sacrifice and not just birthright, this is the moment where justice finally meets the threshold of the palace. Why now? Why, after years of whispers and scandals, has Charles decided to strike with such finality? The answer lies in the survival of the institution itself. As the king faces his own health battles and looks toward the future of Prince William, he realizes that the crown cannot afford to harbor shadows. Andrew has become a poison in the bloodstream, a constant reminder of a century of entitlement that no longer has a place in a modern world. For the audience in America, who have watched this drama unfold with a mix of fascination and disdain, this is a masterclass in institutional preservation. When the rot threatens the structure, the gardener must be ruthless. The physical eviction is only the beginning. As the security details begin to shift and the locks are prepared for a new occupant, the psychological weight of this forever ban begins to sink in. Andrew is not just losing a house, he is losing his identity. He is being stripped of the last vestiges of his royal status, forced out of the inner circle and into the cold light of accountability. This is the iron heart of Windsor in action. Charles has chosen the sanctity of the crown over the comfort of his brother, proving that in the Game of Thrones, duty is the only currency that matters. As Andrew prepares to walk out of those gilded doors for the last time, he carries with him the heavy knowledge that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. The era of the favorite son is dead. The era of the responsible king has truly begun. The summons had arrived not as an invitation, but as an ultimatum. Prince Andrew had walked into the king's private study at Windsor Castle, expecting a negotiation, perhaps even a reprieve. He arrived with the practiced air of a man who still believed his charm and his status, as the late queen's favorite, would provide him an escape hatch. But the man waiting for him behind the mahogany desk was no longer the older brother who shared childhood memories at Balmoral. This was the king, a monarch who had spent 70 years preparing for the moment he would have to choose between family and the survival of the British monarchy. The air in the room was thin, charged with the static of a storm that had been brewing for years. Charles did not stand when Andrew entered. He didn't offer a chair or a glass of scotch. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on a leather-bound folder, the Audit of Accountability. This document contained more than just the astronomical costs of Andrew's security or the mounting repair bills for Royal Lodge. It contained the ledger of a damaged reputation, a tally of every headline that had chipped away at the throne's dignity. For you, the audience who remembers the era of the late Queen's unwavering discipline, this meeting was the ultimate test. It was the moment where the rotting wood of the royal structure was finally identified and marked for removal. "I have carried your shadow for long enough," Charles reportedly said, his voice a low, vibrating rasp that carried the weight of centuries. He spoke of the late Queen not with sentiment, but with a tragic realization. Her love had been weaponized against the crown's interests. Andrew tried to protest, leaning on the narrative of his service and his rights as a duke. But Charles cut through the noise with surgical precision. "You speak of rights," the king countered, "but you have forgotten your duties. The crown is a burden you were born to share. Yet, you have treated it as a cloak to hide your indiscretions." This wasn't a brotherly chat. It was a sentencing. The psychological warfare in that room was absolute. Charles laid out the terms of the ejection with a coldness that stunned even the most seasoned palace aides listening from the corridors. He didn't just ask for the keys to Royal Lodge. He demanded the total surrender of Andrew's public existence. Every privilege, every gilded door, and every ounce of protection was being rescinded. To the American audience who values the self-made spirit, this was the ultimate downfall of a man who believed he was untouchable. Charles made it clear, the royal estate is for those who serve the people, not for those who expect the people to serve them. As the meeting reached its climax, Charles picked up a fountain pen, the same pen used to sign state decrees and national proclamations. With a single, fluid motion, he signed the order that would trigger the eviction. The scratch of the nib on the parchment was the only sound in the room, a tiny noise that signaled the end of a royal era. Andrew stood frozen, the realization of the word forever finally beginning to pierce his armor. He was no longer the duke who could hide behind the palace walls. He was a man being cast out into the wilderness of his own making. The iron heart of Windsor had spoken, and for the first time in his life, Andrew found himself without a shield. While the world sees King Charles III's signature on the eviction notice, the true force behind this ejection lies in a silent, formidable alliance between the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal. Princess Anne and Prince William have formed what insiders call the Iron Shield, a tactical partnership designed to protect the future of the monarchy by ruthlessly excising the vulnerabilities of the past. For you, the viewer who has watched this family for decades, you know that Charles is a man of profound sentiment, a man who still sees the little brother he played with in the gardens of Sandringham. Left to his own devices, Charles might have allowed the stalemate at Royal Lodge to continue for years. But William and Anne knew that the crown no longer had the luxury of time. Princess Anne, the most disciplined and hard-working member of the family, served as the legal and historical architect of this move. She did not approach her brother with emotion. She approached him with evidence. Behind closed doors, she presented the king with a comprehensive audit of the cost of entitlement. She laid out the mounting legal fees, the security risks, and the erosion of public trust caused by Andrew's continued presence in a state-owned mansion. To Anne, the royal estate is not a playground for disgraced relatives. It is a sacred trust. She reminded Charles that their mother, the late Queen, had spent 70 years building a fortress of duty, and allowing Andrew to hide behind its walls was an insult to her legacy. Then there is Prince William. As the future king, William's perspective is fueled by a cold, modern necessity. He understands that his own reign is already being shaped by the decisions made today. William reportedly told his father that the Sussex drama was a wound, but the Andrew situation was a slow-growing poison. He made it clear that he would not inherit a throne weighed down by the baggage of a man who refused to show true remorse. William and Anne's coordination was flawless. While Anne provided the moral and legal framework, William provided the urgency. They presented Charles with a choice. He could be a brother, or he could be a king. He could not be both. This secret council held late-night sessions at Highgrove and Gatcombe Park, far from the prying eyes of the London press. They strategically leaked the entitlement burden narrative to shift public perception, ensuring that when the forever ban was finally announced, the public would see it not as cruelty, but as long overdue justice. For the American audience, this reveals the true power dynamic within the palace today. The Iron Heart of Windsor is not a single person. It is a collective defense mechanism. William and Anne have signaled to the world that the era of the protected royal is over. The gates of Royal Lodge are closing, and the architects of this purge are already looking toward the next phase of the crown's survival. As the sun began to set over the sprawling acres of Windsor Great Park, the atmosphere inside Royal Lodge shifted from a tense standoff to a scene of absolute, raw desperation. Prince Andrew, a man who had spent 60 years believing he was the untouchable favorite son, was now a man cornered by the very institution that had once defined him. For you, the audience who values the sanctity of a contract and the weight of a person's word, this was the moment where the lease of entitlement finally expired. Andrew did not go quietly into the night. Instead, he spent the 11th hour clutching at straws, launching a frantic, behind-the-scenes campaign to halt the ejection that was already set in motion by his brother's signature. The primary weapon in Andrew's futile arsenal was a 75-year lease agreement signed in 2003, a document he believed was an ironclad fortress. He reportedly spent hours in his private library, surrounded by litigious defenses, shouting into a secure phone line to a dwindling circle of high-priced lawyers. He was looking for a loophole, a technicality, anything that could prevent the king from reclaiming the 30-room mansion. But what Andrew failed to grasp was that the crown operates on a higher plane than civil law. Charles's legal team had already anticipated this litigious defense. They had spent months documenting Andrew's failure to maintain the estate to royal standards, citing the crumbling masonry, the peeling paint, and the general air of neglect as a breach of contract. The king wasn't just evicting a brother, he was terminating a failed tenancy. In the height of his panic, Andrew made a series of secret calls that went largely unanswered. He reached out to old allies in the military, to the few remaining billionaire friends who hadn't yet distanced themselves from his scandals, and even, allegedly, to contacts in the media to leak a narrative of elderly victimization. But the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. The palace had already sent out a quiet but firm warning. Anyone who assisted the Duke in resisting the king's decree would find themselves on the wrong side of the future monarchy. To the American audience, this illustrates the cold reality of being ghosted by the establishment. One minute you are a prince with the world at your feet. The next, you are a ghost in your own hallways, ignored by the very people who once sought your favor. The psychological breaking point came when Andrew saw the first of the official removal vans idling at the gates of the estate. These weren't the discreet vehicles of a private move. They were the visible symbols of a sovereign cleanup. The Iron Heart of Windsor had left no room for sentiment. Every desperate call, every legal threat, and every plea for more time was met with the same icy response from the palace. The decision is final. The locks are being changed. Andrew realized then that he was no longer fighting a legal battle. He was fighting a tidal wave of history. The walls of Royal Lodge, once a sanctuary of privilege, had become a gilded cage, and the key had already been turned by a brother who had finally chosen the crown over blood. As the official eviction teams, overseen by the king's most trusted equerries, crossed the threshold into the private quarters of Prince Andrew, the atmosphere shifted from administrative duty to a scene of historical reckoning. For you, the audience who remembers the impeccable standards maintained by the late Queen Elizabeth II, what was discovered inside those 30 rooms was more than just a breach of contract. It was a betrayal of the royal image. The secret vault of Royal Lodge did not contain gold or jewels. It contained the physical evidence of a man who had spent decades living in a state of defiant neglect, surrounded by the rotting trophies of a lost era. This was the moment the king's team realized that the ejection was not just a legal necessity, but a moral imperative to save the royal estate from further decay. The most shocking discovery was not the crumbling architecture, but the paper trail of denial. In a locked study at the heart of the mansion, staff uncovered a cache of private correspondence that had never been seen by the palace's central administration. These were not state documents, but desperate pleas and stern warnings from the late queen herself, dated years before her passing. The letters revealed a mother's heartbreak and a sovereign's growing frustration, documenting Andrew's repeated refusals to downsize or settle his mounting debts. For the American viewer who values accountability, these papers prove that the forever ban was a sentence decades in the making. Andrew hadn't just ignored his brother, he had ignored the final wishes of the very mother he claimed to be honoring by staying in the house. Beyond the letters lay the vault of liabilities files, containing details of past associations and unvetted business deals that the palace had long suspected but could never prove. As staff cleared the rooms, they found expensive gifts from controversial figures, left unmaintained and gathering dust, symbols of a lifestyle that prioritized personal gain over the dignity of the crown. The Iron Heart of Windsor team acted with forensic precision, cataloging every item as evidence of a breach of royal standards. This wasn't a move, it was a cleanup operation of a toxic site. The king was informed in real time as these items were unearthed, further hardening his resolve to ensure Andrew would never again hold a key to a royal residence. The psychological impact on the staff involved in the purge was profound. They spoke of a cloying heaviness inside the lodge, a sense that the house itself was suffocating under the weight of Andrew's entitlement. As the last of his personal effects were created, including his infamous collection of teddy bears and military memorabilia, he was no longer entitled to display the palace aids, felt a sense of collective relief. The sanctity of the crown was being restored, room by room. The ejection had moved beyond a family feud. It had become a disinfection of the monarchy's soul. The doors were being shut, the secrets were being filed away, and the king was finally reclaiming the ground that had been occupied by a shadow for far too long. Across the Atlantic, within the manicured walls of their Montecito estate, the news of Prince Andrew's total ejection and the stripping of his titles hit like a seismic shock. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, this was not just another headline about a disgraced uncle. It was a cold, terrifying mirror held up to their own future. For you, the audience who has witnessed the Sussexes' transition from royal duties to Hollywood glamour, this moment marks a turning point in the psychological warfare between the crown and its exiles. The Iron Heart of Windsor has proven that it is capable of more than just passive-aggressive silence. It is now actively erasing the past to protect the future. The message sent from London was loud and clear. If the king can destroy his own brother's royal existence, no one is untouchable. The reaction in the Sussex camp was reportedly one of stunned silence, followed by frantic calculation. Sources suggest that Meghan, who once viewed the British monarchy as an archaic theatre, suddenly realized that the theatre had just closed its doors and changed the locks for good. The precedent set with Andrew, the removal of the prince title, and the forever ban from royal residences directly threatens the very brand the Sussexes have built their lives upon. Without the royal connection, what remains? For the American viewer who values the brand of authenticity, this is the ultimate crisis of identity. Harry and Meghan are no longer looking at a family feud. They are looking at a sovereign purge that could, with one more signature from Charles, render them completely irrelevant on the global stage. The comparison to their own eviction from Frogmore Cottage in 2023 now seems like a minor skirmish compared to this total war. While Harry had once pleaded with his father, referencing his children and his need for a UK home, the treatment of Andrew shows that the king is no longer listening to pleas of sentiment. The Iron Heart has hardened. The realization that Prince William, a man Harry has publicly criticized, was a key architect in this move, has added a layer of personal dread to the California sun. Harry knows that the hand that carved the line in the sand against Andrew is the same hand that will one day hold the scepter of the king. There is a cloying sense of what's next hanging over Montecito. The Sussexes have spent years throwing carefully worded grenades at the palace, but they never expected the palace to respond with a nuclear option. As they watch the removal vans at Royal Lodge and the formal striking of Andrew's name from the peerage, the fear of losing their own titles, the very Duke and Duchess styles they use to secure multi-million-dollar deals, is becoming a visceral reality. The silence from California is not a choice. It is a defensive crouch. They are beginning to understand that in the battle against the crown, the house always wins, and King Charles has just proven he is willing to burn the family tree to save the forest. As the dust begins to settle on the empty hallways of Royal Lodge, the focus of the palace has shifted from the removal of the past to the restoration of the future. The ejection of Prince Andrew was never just about a vacant building. It was about reclaiming the physical and symbolic center of gravity for the Prince and Princess of Wales. For you, the viewer who has stood by the monarchy through its darkest hours, This transition represents the Great Restoration. Royal Lodge, a 30-room estate that had become a monument to stagnation and neglect, is now being prepared as the tactical headquarters for Prince William and Catherine. The Iron Heart of Windsor is not just a mechanism for punishment, it is a blueprint for a leaner, more focused monarchy. And the Wales family is at the very center of that vision. Behind closed doors, the plans for the renovation are already in motion. But these are not mere aesthetic upgrades. This is a spiritual cleansing of an estate that has been shrouded in scandal for far too long. Insiders suggest that Prince William has personally overseen the directives to strip the house to its bones, ensuring that every vestige of the previous era is removed. For the American audience who admires the grace and resilience of Princess Catherine, her move into Royal Lodge is seen as the ultimate victory of light over shadow. Catherine, who has faced her own health battles with quiet dignity, represents the antithesis of the entitlement that defined Andrew's tenure. Her presence in the lodge will signal a return to the values of duty, family, and public service that the monarchy was built upon. The strategic importance of this move cannot be overstated. By moving the future king and queen into the heart of the Windsor estate, King Charles is effectively future-proofing the monarchy. This is a consolidation of power that leaves no room for part-time or disgraced royals to linger on the sidelines. The forever ban on Andrew ensures that the next generation can grow and lead without the cloying weight of past controversies. For you, the audience who values a strong and stable leadership, this is the moment where the crown finally stops looking backward. The Iron Heart has cleared the path, and as William and Catherine prepare to step into this new chapter, they carry with them the hopes of a nation that is ready to see the monarchy thrive once more. The gates of Royal Lodge are being reopened, but this time they lead to a future defined by responsibility, not privilege. The physical ejection of Prince Andrew from Royal Lodge was the opening salvo, but the true masterstroke is occurring now within the paneled chambers of Westminster. King Charles III is not just acting as a disgruntled older brother. He is operating as a sovereign who understands that for a ban to be forever, it must be backed by the full force of the law. For you, the audience who values the rule of law and the sanctity of constitutional order, this is the moment where the king turns a family dispute into a statutory reality. Charles is reportedly in quiet, high-level consultations with the government to invoke the Titles Deprivation Act, or similar legislative mechanisms that would effectively strip disgraced royals of their remaining honors in a way that no future monarch, no matter how sentimental, could ever reverse. This is the constitutional earthquake that the palace has feared for decades. By inviting Parliament into the internal affairs of the family, Charles is breaking a centuries-old taboo to save the monarchy from its own bloodline. The goal is clear: to create a statutory shield around the crown. This move ensures that the Duke of York title is not merely suspended, but effectively retired or placed in a permanent state of abeyance. For the American viewer who understands that accountability is the bedrock of any institution, this is the ultimate proof of the king's resolve. He is removing the safety net, proving that a title is a contract with the people, and when that contract is breached by scandal and neglect, the contract is null and void. The tremors of this earthquake are being felt most acutely by those watching from California. If the king establishes a legislative precedent to strip Andrew of his titles and his estate, the Sussex problem suddenly becomes much easier to solve. Harry and Meghan's Duke and Duchess styles, which they have clung to as their primary currency in Hollywood, are now on the legal chopping block. The Iron Heart of Windsor has realized that diplomacy has failed, and only the cold finality of the law can protect the institution's dignity. The message to the world is unmistakable. The British monarchy is no longer a private family business. It is a lean, disciplined state institution where performance is the only path to survival. As the king works with the Prime Minister and constitutional experts to codify these changes, the sense of finality at Royal Lodge becomes absolute. The locks have been changed, but it is the change in the law that truly bars the door. Andrew is not just a man without a home. He is a man becoming a footnote in history, a warning to all who believe that birthright is a license for bad behavior. The Iron Shield is being forged in the fires of legislation, and when the process is complete, the crown will emerge harder, colder, and more resilient than ever before. The era of royal immunity is over. The era of the sovereign decree has arrived. The echoes of the heavy gates closing at Royal Lodge did not stop at the borders of the Windsor estate. They reverberated across the Atlantic, triggering a public reckoning that has redefined the world's perception of King Charles III. For you, the audience who values the weight of character and the necessity of accountability, the data emerging from this crisis is nothing short of revolutionary. For decades, the public viewed Charles as a man of hesitation, a prince in waiting whose sentimentality might be his greatest weakness. But the ejection of Prince Andrew has shattered that narrative. Shocking new polls from the UK and the US show a surge in approval for the king's iron heart, proving that the global public was not looking for a brotherly compromise. They were looking for a king who was willing to prioritize the institution over his own blood. In the United Kingdom, the polling data is a landslide. Over 80% of respondents across all demographics, including the traditionally skeptical younger generations, have rallied behind the king's decisive action. The British public, tired of the York scandal overshadowing national progress, sees this move as a long-overdue cleansing of the royal house. But the true surprise lies in the United States. For an American audience that has often been captivated by the Sussex narrative of personal freedom, the tide has turned. U.S. viewers, particularly the 50 to 80 demographic, who value traditional standards of conduct, are now viewing Charles as a guardian of a 1,000-year-old legacy. They recognize that in a world of shifting values, the king has drawn a line in the sand that says, honor is not negotiable. This global shift has created a dangerous vacuum for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. As the world applauds the king's ruthlessness against Andrew, the victim narrative from Montecito is beginning to lose its sting. The public is no longer asking if the king is being cruel. They are asking why it took so long for the rot to be removed. This is the psychological pivot that the palace had strategically anticipated. By dealing with Andrew first, the most controversial figure in the family, the king has effectively paved the way for a broader purge. The public has given him a mandate for discipline, and the Iron Heart of Windsor is now empowered to act with even greater finality. As we look at the headlines from London to Los Angeles, one thing is clear. The monarchy has survived its own internal poison by choosing the cold path of justice. The forever ban on Andrew has transformed the king from a grieving son into an enforcer of the crown's survival. The world has delivered its verdict. The era of the protected royal is over, and the era of accountability has officially begun. The gates are shut, the poll numbers are in, and for the first time in his reign, King Charles III is not just the head of a family, he is the undisputed master of his house. As the final removal van disappears into the mist of Windsor Great Park, the silence left behind at Royal Lodge is more than just the absence of sound. It is the absence of an era. The ejection of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is complete. For you, the audience who has witnessed the slow, agonizing decay of royal standards over the last decade, this is the moment of ultimate catharsis. The keys have been handed over, the name Prince Andrew has been struck from the peerage, and the 30-room fortress of entitlement has been reclaimed by the sovereign. This is the final judgment. King Charles III has proven that while the blood of a brother is thick, the survival of the crown is thicker. The message to the world is undeniable. The British monarchy has been reborn as a lean, ruthless, and disciplined machine that no longer has room for the shadows of the past. But the true impact of this moment lies in the shadow it casts toward California. As the gates of Royal Lodge lock for the last time, the warning to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle is absolute. The Iron Heart of Windsor has shown its hand. If the king is willing to render his own brother a commoner, forced into a shoebox-sized cottage at Sandringham, there is no longer a safety net for those who have spent years attacking the institution from abroad. For the American audience, the spectacle is clear. The era of the royal celebrity is dead. Accountability has arrived, and it carries the weight of a 1,000-year legacy. The Sussexes now find themselves in a cold, strategic vacuum, realizing that their titles are not birthrights, but fragile privileges that can be revoked with the stroke of a pen. As we look toward the future, the ascension of Prince William and Catherine into this reclaimed ground signals a monarchy of steel. The House of Windsor has purged its toxins and reinforced its borders. The Iron Shield is up. This journey has shown us that in the game of crowns, there is no room for sentimentality when the stakes are eternal. The gates are shut, the locks are changed, and the favorite son is gone. The era of responsibility has officially begun, and the world is watching in awe as the king finally takes his stand. This is not just an ending, it is the definitive reset of the British monarchy. The line in the sand has been drawn, and it will never be crossed again.